The hum of the projector filled the conference room like a low, uneasy heartbeat. The blinds were half drawn, letting in just enough gray light to make the screen glow sharper than it should have. People cleared their throats, shifted in their chairs, and pretended not to study the door. I'm Daniel Price, 35 project manager, and in about 10 minutes, my boss would present my work as if he'd written it himself. From my seat near the wall, I watched him rehearse that half-smile of borrowed confidence. He tugged his cufflinks, tapped the clicker against his palm, and scanned the first slide. My slide. The scent of dry erase marker still hung in the air from when I'd covered the whiteboard last night with risk formulas and cost curves. The others had gone home. I had stayed because numbers don't sing unless someone teaches them the tune. He cleared his throat. Good morning, everyone. The first slide bloomed onto the wall. My framework. My language. I recognized even the typo in the subheading. He forgot to fix it. For the first 20 minutes, he glided. His voice had that smooth baritone they hire for airline safety videos, reassuring, practiced, vaguely hypnotic. He moved through my projections like a man strolling through a house he didn't own, pointing out the crown molding to guests and calling it a personal touch. Heads nodded. The VP of Finance leaned back, fingers steepled. The clients from Houston jotted notes. I sat there, invisible, my hands folded over a pen I didn't need. He had rehearsed my pitch line by line. Every cost-saving model, every compliance metric, every slide that had kept me up for 3 nights straight. I could hear my own voice in his phrasing, but with the warmth stripped out, sterile, hollow, perfect for applause. The room broke into polite laughter at one of his jokes, a joke I had written as a placeholder note. Insert icebreaker here. They didn't know that. He didn't either. Illusions have a half-life. They decay in the light of questions. At 9:42 a.m., an auditor named Reynolds leaned forward. His glasses flashed in the projector glow. We've reviewed the projected savings in your risk analysis, he said, even and polite. And they look promising. We'll need confirmation. Who is the designated project owner for this contract? A beat too long. My boss's smile twitched. The team worked on this collectively, he said. Reynolds didn't blink. The compliance system lists a project owner. We'll need the signed certification. Where is it? Papers shuffled. My boss coughed. The details are handled within the department. I oversee strategy. Reynolds slid a folder forward. According to the registry, the project owner of record is Daniel Price. We require his certification. Silence. In the reflection on the screen, I watched shoulders stiffen, a vein sharpen along a jawline, a pen pause mid-click. To the room, Daniel Price was just a name. To the system, it was the only key that turned the lock. My phone buzzed at 9:47. Mason, my boss. Where are you? We need you in here now. I turned the phone face down and let the message hum against the table's wood. You could almost hear the illusion cracking. The pattern that brought us here hadn't arrived with a bang. It seeped in like water under a closed door. When I first joined the company 7 years ago, it was scrappy, messy, alive. We worked late, argued loud, celebrated small wins with cheap champagne and cheaper pizza. I believed in what we were building, a risk analytics firm that would clean up the industry's chaos with logic, clarity, and integrity. Mason, my boss back then, was different. Back then he was hungry. He asked questions that meant something, listened when I talked about system gaps. We were partners in all but title. He called me the engine behind the machine. But somewhere between the second round of investors and the move to our glass-walled office downtown, that changed. The man who once stayed late beside me started showing up only for the applause. His questions turned into directives. His curiosity was replaced by charm. Charm doesn't build systems. It just hides the cracks until the foundation buckles. He learned quickly that silence was cheaper than talent. People like me, the ones who built the logic, became props in his success story. And because I wasn't the loudest, I became the easiest to ignore. Meetings blurred into performances. I'd speak up with solutions, he'd repeat them 5 minutes later, and everyone would nod approvingly. At first I thought it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the work was good. But credit has gravity. It determines who gets listened to next time. And one day you realize you're the ghost writing someone else's career. That realization came slowly, disguised as exhaustion. I started skipping lunches, stopped volunteering for presentations, My notebook filled with neat little lists of deliverables, each with a tiny number next to it. 43 hours this week. 57. 62. One Friday, I found one of my paragraphs, word for word, in a press release Mason had sent to the board. He hadn't even removed the comment tag I'd left, rephrase before publishing. When I confronted him, he just smiled. It's all team effort, Daniel. You know that, team effort. The corporate synonym for you did the work, I did the talking. The break didn't come in one explosion. It arrived in fragments, little, almost invisible shifts that only make sense when you look back and connect them. The first fragment was a whisper. One afternoon in March, I was heading back from a client call when I overheard Mason's voice through the half-open door of HR. He wasn't angry. He was laughing, soft, confident, like a man casually sealing someone else's fate. Daniel's good, sure, he was saying. But we need new blood. Someone who thinks fast, not just deep. He's too cautious for the next phase. There was a pause, then the low murmur of the HR director. You mean redundancy? Mason chuckled. Exactly. We'll make it sound clean. I didn't move. Just stood there in the hall, the hum of the air conditioner loud in my ears. I'd given that man 7 years of my life. I'd kept his systems afloat through outages, through client crises. Through all the weekends he disappeared to strategize. I was the name buried in the metadata of every success story his firm had sold. And now I was a redundancy. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone left. The city outside was a reflection, lights, movement, life, while my reflection in the darkened glass just sat there, still. I opened the compliance registry. Every project, every audit, every client document, I read each entry like a diary of my invisible years. My name wasn't on the website, but it was inside the code. Project owner D. Price, last revision, 11:47 p.m. Certification, valid, every signature, every timestamp. Each one a small truth that couldn't be rewritten. I didn't alter anything. Didn't plan anything. Just watched the quiet proof that I'd existed. In a company where reputation was smoke, documentation was iron. The next morning, Mason called a team meeting. He was all smiles, wearing that perfect navy suit he saved for big days. Big announcement, everyone, he said. We've secured a board presentation next week with our Houston partners. This could redefine our growth projection. His eyes flicked to me for a split second. Daniel, I'll need you to finalize the models by Friday. Of course, I said. Who'll be presenting? He smiled like a poker player holding all the cards. I will. But I'll credit the whole team. The room applauded. I didn't. When the meeting ended, I lingered long enough to hear him laughing in the hallway with his new protege, Evan, a fast-talking 28-year-old who thought sarcasm was strategy. Mason said, once this goes through, we'll rebrand the department. Maybe streamline the team. Streamline. Another word for erase. That was the moment I decided to stop saving him from himself. 3 days later, the email arrived. Subject line, performance review, mandatory attendance, Friday, 4:15 p.m. No agenda. No attachments. It was an old trick. Fire someone right before the weekend, when the HR director could slip the paperwork in and be gone by 5. I showed up early. The conference room smelled like printer toner and anxiety. Karen from HR sat stiffly across the table. Mason leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like a movie CEO. We've noticed some challenges in adapting to new structures, he began. Translation. You're not letting me take enough credit, he continued. All smooth rehearsed phrases, realignment, culture fit, opportunity elsewhere. Then Karen slid a beige envelope toward me. Severance package. 2 months. Polite execution. I let my eyes rest on Mason. So this is it? He smiled, that tight little grin that never reached his eyes. You'll land on your feet. You're talented, Daniel, but we're moving in a different direction. I nodded once. You're certain you can manage without me? Of course, he said. We'll be fine. I stood, placed my company laptop gently on the table, and straightened my tie. Then I wish you good luck. Next Thursday, when the auditors ask about my signatures. His grin faltered for half a heartbeat. But it was enough. Am I being escorted out? I asked Karen. She hesitated. Yes, just a precaution. Of course, I said, and smiled, calm, polite, and sharp enough to cut glass. As the elevator doors closed, I checked my watch. 10 minutes. That's how long it would take for the system to detect the device handover, and then my access would expire, which meant one thing. The compliance chain would freeze exactly where I left it, locked, untouchable, and waiting for a signature that would never come. That weekend, I didn't leave the city. I didn't storm around or drink myself into clarity. I did what I'd always done best, I thought. I sat in my apartment surrounded by the kind of silence that hums. Every email I'd written, every certification I'd logged, every line of code I'd documented, they all lived in one immutable place, the compliance chain. Mason could charm investors all he wanted, but without those certifications, the system was a body without a heartbeat. Still, I didn't want revenge. Not yet. Revenge born of rage burns too hot. It blinds you. I wanted precision. I opened my laptop. Updated my resume for the first time in 5 years. This time I didn't undersell myself. Project ownership, 12 high-value compliance contracts. Client retention rate, 98%. Audit record. 0 failures in 7 years. Each line was a quiet reclamation. At 11:08 p.m., a message pinged from an old contact. Someone from a consulting firm we'd partnered with years ago. Hey Daniel, heard about the shakeup. If you're open to coffee, Northbridge Consulting is expanding. We could use someone like you. I smiled, marked it unread, and closed the laptop. Not yet. Let Mason's illusion break on its own first. The next morning, I pulled a box from the closet, old files, drafts, notes. Among them, a small black notebook filled with my early sketches for a project Mason had killed 3 years ago. A risk-tracking dashboard, something more transparent and efficient than the clunky legacy system we used. He'd called it too academic. I called it integrity. By Sunday evening, I'd recoded part of it on my personal machine, nothing proprietary, just principles and structure. Something clean, built on truth instead of pretense. When I finally stepped outside, the city air felt new. I walked past the building where I'd given 7 years of my life. The windows were dark, but I could almost see them. Mason rehearsing his pitch, Evan adjusting the slides, Karen pretending this was normal, and I smiled. Because I already knew what would happen when the auditors came asking for my certification. Didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was nothing. Tuesday morning arrived, sharp and cold, and the kind of day when even the sunlight feels like it has teeth. I wasn't there, of course. I didn't need to be, but I knew the schedule like a clock I'd built myself. At 9 a.m., the board and 2 external auditors would gather in the conference room. At 9:05, the clients from Houston would dial in for the quarterly review, and at 9:10, Mason would start the performance he'd rehearsed for days. From the calm of my apartment, I could picture every detail, the shuffling papers, the fake laughter, the scent of overbrewed coffee, and Mason standing at the front, flashing the grin of a man who thought charm could replace competence. He'd probably spent the morning perfecting his tie, rehearsing his smile in the elevator glass. He didn't know the one thing you can't rehearse: credibility. For 20 minutes, he would be perfect. The presentation would glide smooth as a scripted commercial. He'd repeat my talking points about data integrity and modular risk mitigation without tripping once. And then, at 9:42 a.m., the illusion would meet reality. It always starts with one question too specific to bluff. Auditor Reynolds, meticulous, quiet, allergic to nonsense, would lean forward. He'd open the compliance log, look at the record, and ask, "We need to confirm the certification. Who's the registered project owner?" Mason would stall, smile, pretend not to hear, then try to pivot. This was a team effort, he'd say. Reynolds wouldn't even blink. The system requires a designated owner's signature. Daniel Price. I imagined the silence that followed. Thick, hot, and suddenly personal. Someone would cough. A chair would squeak. The clients from Houston would glance at each other on screen. And then the second blow, the file access denial. Because once Mason had revoked my credentials, the digital chain sealed itself. Every certification was locked. Every update required my reauthorization. They couldn't fake my name, couldn't override the system, couldn't even download a backup. At 9:47, my phone buzzed. Mason, where are you? We need you here now at 9:51. Please, just come in. We'll fix this together. At 9:58, they're freezing the project. Daniel, I'm serious. I poured myself another cup of coffee and let the phone vibrate itself into silence. By 10:03, I received an email from Owen, one of the junior analysts who'd always respected me. Everything's crashing. They're asking for your signature again. Mason said you were unavailable. What do I tell them? I typed back, tell them to follow compliance procedure. If my name's on the file, it's because I owned it. At 10:17, the first client left the meeting. At 10:26, another followed. By 10:40, Mason's tone would have shifted from confidence to panic, a man realizing the ship he stole was sinking under him. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete data or corrupt files. I simply walked away, and the system stopped pretending it didn't need me. That afternoon, I went for a walk through downtown. The air was brisk, the city alive with the sound of normal people doing normal things. I passed the building where I used to work. From the street, you could see the reflection of the boardroom in the glass facade, people pacing, voices raised, Mason's silhouette leaning over a table. I smiled and kept walking. By 5 p.m., the news had spread through the office network. The Houston deal was suspended pending compliance verification. Without that certification, the contract couldn't be invoiced, which meant no payment, which meant no quarterly bonus for Mason. And that, for him, was worse than failure. It was humiliation. By Wednesday, I was sitting across from the director of Northbridge Consulting in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the river. She was in her 40s, sharp eyes, no patience for buzzwords. The kind of leader who built rather than performed. We're rebuilding our risk division, she said, sliding a folder across the table. We need someone who doesn't panic when systems break, someone who builds them so they don't. The folder contained numbers, not slogans, client names, project outlines, potential contracts. It wasn't a job interview. It was a partnership proposal. I flipped through the pages and saw something Mason would never recognize. Structure, integrity, work that made sense. When I looked up, she was smiling faintly. You've built systems that companies twice our size couldn't maintain. You just never got credit for it. Story of my life, I said. She laughed. Then let's rewrite it. We'll start small. One audit transfer from a Houston firm that's reconsidering its vendor. I didn't have to ask which firm she meant. Instead, I said, send me the terms. By Friday, I had a new office, a smaller desk, and more freedom than I'd ever had. No glass walls, no politics. Just clean systems and people who spoke the same language. Clarity. At noon, I got an email from Owen. Mason's losing it. Auditors froze the account. He tried to blame you, but Reynolds showed the logs. They all point back to his authorization removals. The board's furious. I typed one line back, truth keeps receipts. 2 hours later, another message, and this time from one of the Houston clients. Daniel, if you're at Northbridge now, we'd prefer to work with you directly. You were always the reason things ran smoothly. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have, not because it surprised me, but because it was the first time someone said it out loud. By evening, 3 more clients reached out. Not dramatic, not vengeful, just quiet shifts of loyalty, the kind that build an empire or sink one, depending on which side you're on. The next week, I settled into the rhythm of Northbridge. Mornings filled with real conversations, afternoons with clean work, no politics, no stolen credit, no strategic alignments. I was sitting by the window when a headline flashed across my screen. Mason Analytics faces board inquiry after compliance failure. Below it, a quote from the CFO. Procedural oversight caused financial disruption. That was corporate for Mason broke the system and blamed gravity. I closed the browser and leaned back. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It was Thursday evening when the call finally came. Not an email, not a polite request through a third party, a direct call, Mason's name glowing on my screen like an unpaid debt. For a moment, I just stared at it. I could almost hear his voice before picking up, the fake calm, the desperation layered beneath the charm. On the 4th ring, I answered. Daniel, he said. Too fast, too rehearsed. I'm glad you picked up. You don't sound glad, I said quietly. He laughed, but it cracked halfway through. Look, I know how this must seem. Things got tense. The board's all over me. The auditors want explanations. Clients are pulling contracts. You and I built this thing together, right? I just need a little help to stabilize it. Help? I repeated. You mean the kind you fired last week? His sigh was audible. You're still angry? No, I said, leaning back in my chair. Anger fades. But memory tends to last, he hesitated. Then, like every desperate man with too much pride left to lose, he tried flattery. You're the best I've ever worked with, Daniel. You know that. We just need your signature on a few certifications to unlock the pending accounts. I'll pay you for your time. Consultant rate, whatever you want. Say what you mean, Mason. Silence, then small and quiet. I need your signature. There it was. The truth finally uncloaked. Mason, I said evenly. Do you remember what you told HR the day you fired me? He didn't answer. You said I was redundant, that the company needed people who could think faster, not deeper. I didn't mean... You did, I cut in. You meant it enough to gamble a 7-year foundation on a 28-year-old intern who can't read a compliance log. His tone sharpened. Don't patronize me, Daniel. You think because you wrote a few lines of code you're irreplaceable? I smiled, small, invisible, deadly. I didn't write code. I wrote the rules that govern it. He exhaled sharply. You'll regret this. You think these clients will stay loyal? They'll move on the moment they find someone cheaper. Maybe, I said softly. But at least they'll know whose work they're trusting. I could hear him pacing now, the uneven rhythm of someone trying to find a door in a windowless room. Daniel, he said finally, voice breaking. Please, I'm not asking for a war. I just need to fix this. Help me, please. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost kind. You should have thought about that before you signed my name off the ledger. And then I hung up. The silence that followed was perfect. That night, I didn't celebrate. Revenge isn't a party, it's a reckoning. You don't toast to it. You just breathe easier. I sat by the window of my apartment, the city alive below, headlights threading through the rain. Somewhere out there, Mason was realizing what real accountability felt like. The weight of the truth he'd buried for too long finally standing on his chest. At midnight, Owen texted, "Board's in emergency session. CFO wants to freeze executive access. Mason's locked out of the system. Thought you'd want to know." I typed back only 2 words. It's over. Because it was. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no calendar ping. Just quiet. The kind that feels earned. For the first time in years, I didn't dread checking my email. I brewed coffee, opened the blinds, and let the city light spill in. It painted the walls pale gold, soft and steady, the color of peace. I arrived at Northbridge early. The office smelled like fresh paper and possibility. People nodded when I walked by, not in fear. Not in forced politeness, but in genuine respect, the kind that's built on clarity, not hierarchy. By 10 a.m., we were in the conference room reviewing the new audit interface. When my team presented, they didn't recite. They explained. They asked questions. They argued respectfully. I smiled quietly. This was how work was supposed to feel, not performance, purpose. Around noon, an email alert blinked on my phone. Breaking, Mason Analytics. Faces leadership shakeup after compliance failure. I read the first line. CEO Mason Hill resigns amid board investigation into certification misconduct. Then closed it. I didn't need the rest. That story wasn't mine anymore. That evening, I stopped by the river on my walk home. The city lights shimmered across the water, fractured but beautiful. I thought of all the nights I'd walked these same streets feeling invisible, convinced that being quiet meant being safe. Turns out, quiet can be powerful, if you know when to speak. My phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Owen. Starting next week, I'm joining Northbridge. Thanks for teaching me to do things the right way. I smiled, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. No fireworks. No applause. Just peace. At home, I took out the small black notebook, the one with my old sketches for a cleaner system. The first page still bore a coffee stain from years ago, when I'd worked through a storm with nothing but caffeine and faith. On that page, I wrote 2 words under the title, Built Right. Then I closed the book. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the ghost behind someone else's success. I felt real, present, free. The real revenge wasn't Mason's downfall. It wasn't the headlines or the panic. It was peace, the kind that comes from walking away whole. If you've ever watched someone take credit for your work, or been told you were replaceable while holding everything together, you know this feeling. Revenge doesn't always have to burn. Sometimes it just breathes. If stories like this speak to you, if you believe justice can be quiet and sharp, then stay with us. Because in every office, there's another Mason, another Daniel, and another reckoning waiting to unfold. Subscribe to Revenge at the Office, where the best revenge is always clean, smart, and absolutely earned.